Welcome back to another Share Your Light episode. I absolutely love being able to introduce you to people who are stepping into their power, their light, their purpose, and really following their inner guidance and working collaboratively with spirit. It's so important right now. And today we are so blessed and lucky to be talking with Kara Ware, a national board and functional medicine health coach, has spent nearly 2 decades healing her son of the underlying causes creating the symptoms commonly referred to as autism. She didn't accept the limiting belief that there was nothing she could do for her son. Her son looked like he was in unbearable pain. She knew there was something she could do to help him feel better and therefore behave better. In times of dial up internet and flip phones that didn't text, let alone take photos and videos, she was divinely guided to learn about the sources of inflammation that were causing his pain and intolerable and terrifying autistic behaviors and symptoms. Kara discovered there were even more underlying conditions than leaky gut, vitamin and mineral depletion, microbial overload, hormone and immune dysregulation, heavy metal and mold toxicity, and Lyme disease. She found her thoughts, which created her words, and then her actions, which created her habits, which created an atmosphere of healing, ultimately allowing her to accomplish what many still say is impossible. When her perspective changed and her anger turned to embrace what this journey has come to teach, the healing began. She learned her son came to teach her this shift from fear to love and how to support her family to thrive in today's environment. Welcome, Karen. Thank you so, so much for coming on today.
Denise, thank you so much for being with me here.
Uh, this is such an important topic for so many people right now. I think personally that yes, autism was the trigger that opened these doors for you, but this embraces so, so much more. So, I mean, just to see anyone that we love, especially our children, in unbearable pain, what was the catalyst? How did you start to explore that and say there must be a better way for him?
So he was meeting his milestones, and then there was this moment where he wasn't. It was kind of like this switch. He was doing well, and then he was freaking out
Mhm.
and and screaming and biting and headbanging and not sleeping. And the behaviors were terrifying. And when I finally found out what was going on and I started exploring my options, one option was telling me, oh, that's just who he is. There's nothing you can do about it. You just need to medicate him and try to make him more manageable through behavior therapy.
Right.
So we came at it as he's acting bad.
So not addressing the catalyst of what was bringing out the behavior.
Why was he acting bad? Why was he screaming
Yeah.
and biting and banging his head? And why couldn't he sleep? Are you kidding me? This child isn't a bad child. He's 2 years old. This
Right.
isn't a behavioral issue.
Yeah.
And that was the shift when I started looking at him because I was treating it behaviorally, like, oh, if you can't play with your toys, I'm going to take away your toys.
Right.
I was treating it like he was behaving bad. And one day he was in a mad fit. And it was as a new vision appeared to see him communicating to me. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, you are saying you hurt. Does your head hurt? And when I said that, he stopped his fit and he looked at me. And this is a child that lost all eye contact. He didn't
Mhm.
respond to his name. He didn't follow directions. He didn't talk to me. He screamed all day long. His communication sounded like a demonic crow. That was how I
Mhm.
explained it. And he stopped and he looked at my eyes and I said, your head hurts. And he just nodded his head. He just looked right at me.
Oh,
I said, you
oh,
hurt.
see, this
That's what you're
this brings
saying here.
such tears. Oh my goodness.
And that changed everything.
Yeah. Wow. And see, that's one of the things that I've talked with a lot of folks about, especially highly sensitive people that have children that are going through a hard time, is you can connect with them on Telepathic's an odd word, but connect with their spirit, connect with who they really are. And I feel like that's what you did by saying to, oh, your head hurts, and really tuning into his energy and his auric field or his field, whatever it was. And what they're showing me is like that it was a light switch for you. It changed everything. Obviously, how old is your son now?
19.
Wow. Wow. So
He'll be
when you
20 in March.
oh, oh my goodness. Well, what's really cool though is imagine the difference his life would have taken if you hadn't stopped at that moment. But I really believe it's never too late to institute that. You may have a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 28-year-old. It's never too late to help make those changes. So right now you're working in a pediatric office with, tell us about your program. Blunt version, it fascinates the hell out of me because this led to this experience with your son and really tuning into his energy and saying, how can I help? Led into you developing this amazing, amazing program and pretty much protocol for dealing with children with autism, but also with inflammation. So what can you tell us about that?
So, like you said, when I saw his being, I began learning from him. He began teaching me. And I would say to him, you are intelligent and brilliant and fun and adventurous, and you are here to say something great to me. And I'm going to figure this out, and we're going to work together, and we're going to uncover you of this pain. I don't know what it is, but we're figuring this out. We're going to uncover you because I see you.
Wow. And I think it's important to interject there that this must have been 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, that it was a long process, a lot of crying, a lot of fear, a lot of how am I doing the right thing? What can I do to help? And I think that's one of the most helpless feelings in the world is when we can't make it okay for our people, for our little people, especially, or anyone that we love, but especially our own children.
This journey of uncovering the sources of inflammation and then knowing that I gave a lot of that to him in utero and the shame and the guilt, and then understanding, well, where did I get it?
Mhm.
And then you start looking at the big picture of our environment and the antimony from coal burning power plants and the benzene from the forest fires and the neuroendocrine disruptors from all the plastics. It's this huge global scale environmental disaster, and the stress and the pressure. It's not only going to be blood, sweat, and tears and crying, it's going to be nervous breakdowns. It's going to be contemplating suicide. It's going to be planning of what you're going to do with your children when you die because you can't do this anymore. It's going to
Right,
take you to places that are dark and terrifying. It's a real beatdown.
right.
So
And
Zachary taught me as I started learning about inflammation. So it became about me. It became about the earth. It became about the globe. It became about all of its people. It just wasn't about Zachary. But Zachary was showing me this. Zachary opened my eyes. I had not really been paying attention. And the reality is each generation is getting more and more toxic. And that toxicity is interplaying with our genetic vulnerabilities. And when you understand your genetic code, then you can see what disease state you're going to tip into when your genes are bathing in an environment of stress and trauma and toxicity.
see, now that's fascinating because there's been a real call for a lot of people to work on ancestral healing, to break cyclical patterns, to release old pain, shame, trauma, grief. It's been inherited generation after generation after generation. You made a comment earlier that really struck me, and you said you feel like this started in utero. So, do you feel that the stresses and the environmental impacts that you were under transferred to your son and then exasperated what was already happening for him, or was
100%. We're inextricably linked.
right? And that's interesting because one of my sons, it was a very traumatic two very traumatic experiences when I was pregnant with him. And I've noticed things over the years that I know link back to that. And you have to go through that part of being a parent of wishing you could do it differently, or if I had only known, or how could did I handle it well enough? But then we have to go back to, is this part of the contract that we agreed to have so that we could possibly use that to reach more people, which I think is exactly what you're doing now, is you're using this beautiful, beautiful experience and living hell that you went through to start to empower other people that are maybe where you used to be.
Denise, hearing you talk about your son and his timeline and those traumatic events that are then linked to symptoms that were created down the road, that's functional medicine. That's understanding how the life's challenges, adversities, ancestral wounds, patterns, insecurities, all the jazz that we have in this pressurized environment. This is gravity. It's heavy here. It's our programming as a species to look for threats of all kind. That's survival. But what happens is we get locked into that perspective of trying to survive it rather than being relaxed enough to be like, oh, what did that just teach me so I can do things differently so I don't keep going in this direction?
Right. And also not being locked into the genetics that you may have been gifted, inherited, learned, whatever you want to call it, that there can be physical things that everyone else in my family has this, but once you pull that root out and you say, I'm choosing not to do it that way, or you do the work to release I believe there's often, and I'm not a medical person and I don't play one on TV, but there's often an emotional rooted cause that manifests physically. And once you decide to say, I'm not going to play that same game anymore, it changes. And there are things in my biological family that everyone else has certain aspects. I don't have any of them. Choice and free will applies to your health um, as well as working with spirit or your daily life or whatever. So you started working with really connecting with him. How did this lead you on your path a little bit further with exploring functional medicine?
Okay, so like you said, genetics don't have to be our destiny. It's a very exciting time in medicine. We have so much power in claiming health and therefore freedom. Health is our freedom. And it's really how we modify our environment. So you don't have the genetic expressions because you have chosen through free will and connecting to divine source and using your talents to benefit all and yourself, an environment that's conducive to healing.
Right.
And that's what I learned from Zach. So when I started learning about removing all these sources of inflammation, I'm like, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Like this is just how we're going to live.
Mhm.
And that's a pivotal belief that needs to be adopted by and sorry, I would suggest adopting, because this is about all of us. This isn't just about the child. And in today's autism treatment approaches, everything's about the child. Everything's done to the child, and the child can't create its environment. The parents create the environment. So if the parents create the environment, then the parents' health is paramount. And I was the least likely person to ever pull off the consistency, the big thinking, connecting dots, critical thinking. I was the least likely person. I really struggled as a youth. And it's honestly no wonder I have an autistic child in today's environment, because I'm struggled with a lot of the same things, just to a lesser degree.
Mhm.
So I took this on as like, okay, you're teaching me, I will do all this, and then I'll teach you back. And so everything we did, I was telling and explaining it, even though he looked like he was in a far off distant galaxy and he didn't, even look like he knew I existed. And he couldn't even sit still long enough to even for me to finish a sentence. And I would tell him, though, what I'm learning. And that's how I would say it. You're teaching me this, and this is what we're doing, and this is what's going on, and this is why we're choosing this. And in that approach of partnering with him, this wasn't something I was doing to him, which creates force and resistance. And these children are incredibly smart. They're actually smarter than us. They understand what we're saying. We don't understand what they're saying. We have to cover ourselves with inflammation to hear and learn from, and therefore do better ourselves based on the knowledge that they are bringing to us.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I agree with you 100%. I think that we have these intelligent, creative, vivacious, personal opinion that it's a form of evolution that
Amen.
our brain chemistry, where it's
We're
so
becoming more
specialized.
energetic beings. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
Interrupted.
Oh, no, I love it. I absolutely love it. So you keep referring to inflammation. What are some of the causes? Because you brought up some really strong environmental issues, but what else would be causes of inflammation that parents or caregivers or people who themselves may not be on the spectrum and say, I want to improve my quality of life?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to be on the spectrum or hopefully even have a terrible dead end diagnosis that they're telling you there's nothing you can do about to get on board with this, right? And
Hmm.
protect your health, because our health is on attack. It's a war. There's a war happening on our health. It's being grossly and aggressively taken from us.
Oh,
You can summarize inflammation in 5 categories.
okay.
So when you're thinking of wanting to be your best version of yourself and or healing from a once thought dead end diagnosis, there's stress and trauma, like we've already talked about. That is the first trigger of all disease. So we have to be courageous and have professionals who can not, necessarily take us back to those moments and relive from them, but help us to acquire the perspective of, okay, what did that just teach me? So when something really just hits me out of the blue, like with autism, it's like, okay, I get punched from the right, and then I get punched from the left. I got 2 punches in the face, then in the nose, and then all of a sudden, like, it starts like stomping its feet at me and kicking me and not relenting. It's unrelenting. Autism is so unrelenting, the behaviors and the illness. And I'd have to pick myself back up and be like, okay, what did I just learn from that? that ass kicking
Yeah.
right there. So you have to be humble to learn about why things aren't going the way you want them to go.
Right. That's an excellent
So
point.
that you can change, and that's my whole premise, and is that the parents have to change. The parents have to go through their own change process and heal their stress and trauma, because that's the first trigger. The second trigger is dietary. So it's either eating high inflammatory foods that are very difficult to digest and wears down the integrity of your intestines, of your mucous lining. That's a whole deep conversation, but high inflammatory foods are really harmful. It hurts us. And or eating not enough food, or eating too much food, or highly processed with all the chemicals. Food chemistry is a real thing. There are chemists that make flavors. It's
Hmm.
chemicals. We're getting chemicals from our food, air, and water at such a rate that our bodies, our neuro and biochemistry can't keep up, because we have genetic vulnerabilities that don't allow us to deal very easily in a toxic environment.
Right.
And then we're
And
not giving ourselves the nutrients to counterbalance those vulnerabilities so that we can be resilient, because we're not eating the nutrients. And now more than ever, our food is so nutrient depleted because of the big agriculture and the toxic practices of our foods. And then the third sources of inflammation is hidden toxicity. And those are gut pathogens, like in our microbiome that lives in our intestines is a universe of good flora and bad fauna and flora. And it's like Star Wars. I mean, it really is this struggle of who's going to be more populated, who's going to have control of the terrain. The terrain is everything, the universe, the galaxy, right? And so when we have stress and trauma, and we have bad nutrition, sad nutrition, standard American diet, sad nutrition. And then our gut takes a hit, and the neuroendocrine system is already being disrupted because all that stress is now dysregulating our adrenals and our stress response and our cortisol levels and our, all of our glands, our hormones that help us to function, get dysregulated. Now the gut's integrity is out of balance with an overgrowth of bacteria like Lyme spirochetes and viruses like Epstein-Barr and B simplex and most recent virus, and yeast and candida and parasites, and all these things want to live. They want to live. So they're going to fight for your terrain. You're like a host. So hidden pathogens, and then toxicity, the heavy metals, the chemicals in and everything, they're modifying genetically modified organisms for our food with the chemicals in the seed, so that when the pests eat the plant, their stomach explode. And then those big agriculture companies, biotech companies, are like, oh, but that's not what happens to humans. Nothing to see here. The glyphosate doesn't cause any problems to our intestinal integrity or absorption of vitamin D. It's fine. Fertilize your lawn more. Let's grow more GMOs to feed the world. Okay, so gut chemicals and mold toxicity is such a silent killer. It's everywhere. And in West Virginia, where my boys were born and being raised, we joke that that's the state flower. It's it's the mountain state. You've got dark, deep hollers and high mountains, and it's the most beautiful place. But mold it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So you got the toxicity, and then the fifth form of inflammation is financial insecurity. So our relationship with money is one of scarcity, and that we have to fight each other, because if you have something I want, then there's not enough for me. So I need to make systemic laws that keep you from having what I want.
Right. Years ago, I did food insecurity and poverty training, and the woman had grown up very, very, very poor, and she talked from her soul about food insecurity and how people get trapped in that cycle. And it's not just about throwing money at it. It's helping people redefine their lifestyle of how to be healthy and that's such a deep, deep, deep hole that is so interconnected with everything that you're talking about.
Food insecurity. So this ties into inflammation, right? Can you imagine being a mom that's living in a inner city urban area where the transportation, bus routes and highways and roads have been intentionally planned to put you into a center where food is hard to get to, where it's hard to get to the better paying jobs. It's hard, you are trapped from getting to the higher ground so that your home doesn't flood.
And often you need to buy your food at convenience stores or markets, or you don't have access to where many of us just take it for granted that we can go in and buy whatever we want.
That's
Or we
right.
can go to the organic section if we want, if
That's
we
right.
have that extra resources.
That's
So,
right.
and that's a huge, huge, huge part of this. And I'm a big, big component of organic gardening and earth energy, and it's a huge part of who I am and how I live my life. But I also understand, I've lived in many cities, right in the center of cities, and I've always said that to be hungry in the city or to be isolated in the city is much more difficult because you can't find food. You
Yeah,
can't.
the concrete jungle, right?
Right. So anyway, that's really, really helpful about the 5 causes of inflammation. And they're also things that you can address for yourself and for your children. So this is kind of a different spin on things, but how receptive were the providers and the schools and the other professionals that your son encountered as he started to delve into the world?
Oh, good question. Whew. So you're asking specifically about Zachary, like how did people treat him as he entered the world?
Or was there a
Or how did
because I
they
it were they receptive to the different modalities and things that you were
Okay.
integrating into his life?
Okay. When I started learning about all of this, when autism comes in the home, everybody starts taking gigantic steps back. It's not something you want to be around because it's so intolerable and unpredictable at times. And so I stopped being invited to play dates, of course. We stopped being able to go out even in public because his fits were so bad. I had made enough scenes that I wasn't going to keep returning back to absolute meltdowns in my grocery store, for example. And then parents, people are looking at me like I can't control my child, which I couldn't. so, so the world took a huge step out of my life. And when I started learning about all of these antimony and arsenic and mercury and aluminum and where's this all coming from, I started being like this ranting and raving person, because I was of course having a nervous breakdown, and then everyone really didn't want to be around me, like I was really that weird person. And then they hear that I'm doing all these things. So for a while I went dark. I really wasn't around. I never left really. I only saw maybe like 2 or 3 people a week. We did a lot of the diet and lifestyle changes for a year and a half, 2 years. And so nobody really knew what I was doing. We were doing energy work and craniosacral work. And that was all stuff that I found. That was the first layer that I found, thank God, because that's the foundation. You can't skip to advanced medical interventions without first mastering. And when I say mastering is an ever evolving level of mastery, but you have to prioritize mastering the foundation of nutrition and lifestyle and your thoughts and your words and your actions that, change your habits. You can't just start changing your habits without going upstream, and, learning about mold and getting out of the house. And then when I layered in advanced medical interventions a couple years later, I did, those couple people who I still talk to, I did share that we were, for example, doing a very advanced intervention called chelation. And at the time, only one private pharmacy compounded this topical chelator. And a chelator, you can think of, there are natural chelators like parsley and cilantro, for example, that bind to heavy metals and excrete them from your body because we store them in our fat. We store heavy metals. And when our pathways of detoxification are compromised, which his gut, he had the beginning of Crohn's disease. When your gut falls apart, like I was explaining earlier, then your detox builds up and you become toxic soup, and your lymphatic system backs up because it's collecting all the cellular waste and it becomes really sludgy. And, so we did a lot of like jumping on the trampoline. I got a trampoline and I made a ball pit, and I learned. I feel like I kind of got away from your question.
Oh,
But
that's okay.
I needed to set the stage for how people
Yeah,
reacted to this.
yes. Oh, no, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
Okay. I learned in that foundation time, no parenting book gave me any insight of what to do to get some kind of control, some kind of routine. And so an energy healer, Ariel, who we've worked with for the last 20 years, had told me to read Cesar Millan. And so I read Cesar Millan's book, Leader of the Pack, and I learned that aggressive, agitated, anxious, unpredictable state needs exercise. So we get up in the morning, and I lived on 15 acres at the time, which was a godsend, because if I lived in an apartment or even maybe suburbia, I think CPS would have been called on me because he screamed all the time. I think people think I was, torturing this child. But so we got up and ran, and the point being is I learned how to create an atmosphere in my home and prioritize the foundation, which is, to answer your question a while ago, is what I'm doing at Hope for Healing, the pediatric practice I'm partnering with, which we'll talk more about. That we're learning. It was one thing to take myself through this journey, and Zachary and my younger son, who's a whole other story, right? His being and his development and how this affected him. It's one thing to learn how to take your family through it when no one knows what to do, and to start connecting all those dots and building it and really, living it. But it's another to take other families because family dynamics are messy. Are you kidding? So that's why at Hope for Healing, we start with lifestyle, the lifestyle foundation program. And I'm the beginning of your journey. You start with me on all these lessons learned. And so when I layered in 2 years, I had set the foundation. So he was ready for this chelation. Okay. You can't get to an advanced intervention without mastering the prerequisites, because you will cause more harm, because these children are so sensitive. They're so sick. They do not have the resiliency, and their constitution is not strong enough to handle aggressive interventions. And that's what I see today now with parents who have all of this information now available. I knew none of this. None of this was in books or the internet. I was on dial-up internet, Denise. There was no information, and it worked to my advantage, actually, because I was divinely guided to layer interventions in an intelligent sequence so that when we did layer in that chelation, he started saying words. He started looking at me. He started sitting down. He started playing. This is 2 years later. Okay. This wasn't an immediate, like, he didn't start talking for 2 years, even after removing all, sources of nutrition and lifestyle. Like this isn't like, oh, I did this for 6 weeks and he started talking.
Right.
It's a miracle. Do it. Okay. So miraculous things were happening. Everyone around me, my dad, my mom at that time, they were furious with me. They're like, you need to come home. There are all the resources here. They were so mad at me. And I was hanging up on them because they were working against me with what I was finding. And it made sense to me. All this made sense to me. And to help him feel better. And so I had a lot of resistance. I was by myself. Save, Sue and Carlos Plumley really stepped up. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. So when the word got out, I remember one night I did go out for dinner, which was an odd occasion. I met some girlfriends out and I was sharing what was going on. And I told them about the chelation and how we layered this in. And I was traveling, 6 hours to Asheville, North Carolina to work with a brilliant doctor who was so ahead of his time down there. I told him what we were doing and that Dr. Biddle, praise Dr. Biddle, gave me honest, genuine, informed consent. He said, chelation is no joke. You don't want to rush into this. But we did doctor's data and we had lab work and we saw the levels and they were dangerous. And he said, you've been doing such good work. His constitution is strong. We're normalizing his stools, kind of. We're ready, but you need to know that the chelation's molecular structure is jagged. And so it goes into the bloodstream and it collects all the metals, but it's non-discriminatory. It'll also collect beneficial nutrients. So we have to really monitor his vitamins and minerals even more so because he was so depleted, which is why, all of his baby teeth were rotting out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. I had so many baby teeth pulled out because his body was so nutrient deficient, because his gut was so hammered. He couldn't absorb anything from all the toxicity, all the inflammation. And anyhow, word got out in town. I was living in a very small town in the New River Gorge, which is our latest state park. And a medical doctor in town got a hold of that and started telling everybody I was putting my child in danger. Oh, I was experimenting on him dangerously. And I remember being alone on my 15 acres with my 2 babies. And most days I wondered how long it would be for someone to find my 2 babies if I died here. How long would it take for someone to come out and know that I'm not around anymore? Mm-hmm. And so I'm sitting out there thinking about that I'm experimenting on him. Am I? I started questioning myself. So I started weaning him off. Like, is this ridiculous? Mm-hmm. And when I started weaning him off, within days, if not sooner, the regression was so unbearable that I just knew we were on to something. And despite, okay, because I am experimenting. Actually, she was right. I mean, I am experimenting on him, and there is real harm. And the molecular jagged, not only is it non-discriminatory, but when it's excreted through the pathways of detoxification, which is the GI, the kidney, the liver, all these organs, right? The molecular structure can scar and harm the organs as this structure takes these metals, the sponge, and moves it out of his body. So he told me, he's like, we could have kidney, liver failure. Like, I don't know. He said that. We don't know. But what were my options?
Right.
Was I going to just medicate him and make him more manageable? Or was I going to trust that we knew what was going on? This is our best tools we had at this moment. We've done a lot of work up front. This is the best chance possible. I had a most amazing medical team on board. I was working not only when you think of a care plan, the medical piece is one piece to a care plan. So I had Ariel as my energy spiritual advisor, clearing us. I had our craniosacral therapist who was doing the body work, the lymphatic drainage. I had key friends who did keep me close, who did come out and check on me, who did remain in my life. I did have people, of course, there was long periods of isolation, long periods. But that's how I divinely received in the forest. So I praise the Lord. Like, I actually look back on those days living out there just so fondly. It was beautiful and terrifying. But that's the lesson, right? Is that the terrifying has that something else it's bringing with it. So if we can focus on what it's bringing and then make more of that every second of our day, then we can make more enjoyable circumstance, even in the midst of agony and defeat.
Right. Everything you were doing was meeting your son where he was, and you were stepping away from all of the things, all of the traditional things weren't working. They weren't helping, which goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of this is evolving. These kids are evolving in a new direction, and the numbers are growing. There are more and more children and people being diagnosed with autism or having those symptoms or having those tendencies. What you're offering through this program and through the collaboration with this office that you're working with is a chance for people to say, this is where we are now in 2022. This is the child, this is the human being. And it's not going to be the same as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago because the toxins are different, the stresses are different.
So you bring up a good point about the statistics, and you also touched on the treatment and it's not being effective. So 20 years later, parents are still receiving that same treatment plan of pharmacology, behavioral therapy, speech therapy, love him, try to keep him safe, and good luck. There's nothing else you can do. Parents are still receiving that same message 20 years later. Autism care has not advanced in over 20 years, and the results are terrible. They're subpar. Will the kids improve? Yes, they are smart beings. Of course, they're going to improve. Any intervention, especially when done in love, the child will improve 100%. But the results after now of 20 years, I think we have a really good understanding that the results are very limited. So it's time to rethink this and reimagine this and to move in a different direction. And pharmacology has its time and place when used strategically. And with pharmacology, you don't even know, it's just an intelligent guessing game if that pharmaceutical will indeed interact with your genetic code in a way that you can metabolize it. And if you can't metabolize it, then the chemicals and stuff that are in the ingredients of that product will build up. Your toxin load will build up, and then side effects happen. So then you start on this rotating trial and error of pharmaceuticals. And to go back to statistics about autism is when I got into this mess, it was 1 in 150 children in 2006. Today, in 2022, 16 years later, it's like what, 1 in 34? In the year 2025, Dr. Stephanie Seneff at MIT, who's been studying glyphosate and the effects of these chemicals on our development, it will be 1 and 2.
Wow.
The rates are accelerating. But just like how those big biotech companies don't want you to see what the glyphosate's doing to your neurobiological, don't question. Don't do something different, alternative. That's wacko.
And it's smoke and mirrors, as it with so many things. But, it's interesting that you're bringing up the impact of foods. A couple different things. The familial impact of autism, of any kind of diagnosis, or, as a special ed teacher for decades. And that was always something that I'd bring into parent teacher meetings, or, traditional meetings that students needed to go through, is the impact on the whole family. And you mentioned your other son, you mentioned yourself, and that's what you're saying is that everything focuses on throw some pills at it, throw this at it. So
And keep them in all these therapy sessions so that your life at home is totally destroyed and you can't cook and
right,
take care of your other children because this child has so many therapies who doesn't
right,
feel well. Yeah, let's do that.
yeah, and send people into the
Sorry for
home
my
that
sorry.
are.
I'm
Oh,
sorry
no,
for
no,
laughing.
no,
You know.
this is so spot on. My brother was diagnosed with ADHD before they knew anything about it, way, way back. And they medicated him for 2 days, and my father got very upset and said, "Get him off that shit. He's a zombie." And he said, "No, we're not doing it." And he went into the school, and my father wasn't, he was a traditional person of that generation. And he said, "No, we're not doing that." And my mother actually did all this research back then. This is way, way back. And we all went on the Fine Gold diet, which is no additives, no preservatives, no food coloring, everything like way back. And you bake your own bread, and no red food, all those things. And even now, and this is kind of where I'm going with this, I've been paying more attention because I agree, our body is a barometer of environment and what we're putting into it, and energy and all of those other things. I'm trying to pay more attention to what I'm ingesting because, emotional eating, and we'll feed the empty with food, or other things. Certain foods are having a reaction they've never had before. And I thought at first, oh, it's my age, it's this, it's that, but it's not. It's so gotten really tight about reading packaging again and reading ingredients, and stepping back more towards that simplistic whole foods, organic, and it's amazing, amazing the difference it makes. So you're saying the same thing, is we have to start at that foundational level of what can I control in my
Yeah. How can
environment.
I modify my environment?
100%.
Because that is what it is. It's how your environment is interacting with your genetic vulnerabilities that either create the best, most radiant, resilient, version of yourself, or the one that tips into diabetes, or the one that tips into a stroke, or the one that tips into mood and memory issues, or maybe all three. You have
And
all three diagnoses.
I'm horrified to hear that they're medicating 2-year-olds because, again, from my professional background, I worked with a lot in later years with older children, with teenagers, with young adults, and they were on heavy, heavy medications. And I said to this one kid, he said to me, he had turned 18, and he said, I said, "Well, what are you going to do for 18?" He said, "I want to get off my antipsychotics." And I said, "Well, how long have you been on them?" And he said, "I don't remember when I wasn't on them." And I just broke my heart because he was a sweet kid, and he said, "They told me I won't know how to act if they take," and it was a personal opinion, not a medical person, I'm putting that out to the world. It was a racket. It was just to keep him medicated and controlled, and he didn't even know who he was. And I think of him, because he'd be a grown man now, and I think of all he wanted was just to see if he could do it on his own without the med card. And it was scary what they were pumping into that kid every day. 100% agree with you. There is a time and a place for traditional medicine, for pharmacology, and I would never say, "Oh, don't give the diabetic insulin." That's not what I'm saying.
Right. That's a great example.
Right.
And wouldn't it be nice if we could support that 18-year-old and give him the support and the tools to know how to wean off of that pharmacology, for one, by giving him the nutrients that his body has a higher demand for to counteract why he needs the meds in the first place. Yeah, and then have the process of, once we put the support in place, then beginning to remove the pharmacology. There's a real intelligent sequence here, and we need medical guidance. And at Hope for Healing, I'm just so honored that I get to partner with Dr. Paula Krubstad, a visionary pediatric pediatrician, and all of her team, all of us who are coming together at this time to take families through this journey in an intelligent sequence, so that we're using their time and their money wisely, and we're helping to create the environment at home. Healing is at home. It's not in the doctor's office. It's not something the doctor's going to do magically for you. It's not in the therapy. That's what kills me, is that kids go to all these therapies, but then the parents aren't included. And I'd like to tell a story. When I opened up my autism recovery clinic in 2013. So this ties into how did people respond to me. So I told you a personal story of how people responded to me, but I had wonderful people on the way who really supported us. Teachers, I always approach teachers and everyone that they're a part of our care plan. This is a part of Zachary's plan. But when I opened up Integrated Connections, this is a professional, how did people receive me? We started with the parents first. They started with a craniosacral energy work with our most talented body therapist, who was a retired RN. And she was also worked in labor and delivery. So she was very much in tune with natural childbirth. So she was helping to birth families into a new way of being. And we had a lot of coaching for the parents. And when I would explain, we didn't include the children in therapy until much later, like around 4 or 5 weeks, with our talented physical therapist, who was doing profound work with integrating baby reflexes and the craniosacral work to alleviate the soft tissue that is restricting the cranial nerves, which are sensory nerves. And what do our children have? Sensory processing disorder. Well, we learned that we had to push back Maxine, the physical therapist, later in their package of 3 months, because Maxine couldn't work with the child because the parent stress was disrupting the atmosphere. And she couldn't do the work with the child. The child wasn't the problem. So, we have to include ourselves in this healing journey. This is something we do with our children. So I wasn't very popular when I first opened my clinic.
But you made a really, really important point, is by starting with the parents, you help them release that judgment, and you integrate, and you like, we're going to help you so
Yes.
that you can help your child.
Yes.
And that brings tears to my eyes,
Yes,
because
Denise, thank you.
that alone is not the traditional model. It's one of judgment. You're not doing it right. You have
we
to
make
do
it
it this
harder on the
way.
parents. Are you kidding me?
Right.
We make it a million times harder on the parents, and we crush them and we kill them slowly and painfully.
Which, from everything you've shared today, is going to actually cause the inflammation and all of those levels of toxicity to rise.
That's right.
Because
Thank you. And I say that to parents, like, you can be doing all the right things, but if you're stressed and you're not taking care of yourself, and your homes, and you're angry, and your homes and your marriage is a mess, you're never going to get better. So stop spending your money on the fancy, sexy medical interventions. Let's place priority on the foundations, really, of you and your thoughts and your words and your actions. And your thoughts are going to be very dark, and we need to work on that, because that's what's going to create your habits, so that you can implement these diet and lifestyle changes. And you can do this, and we're here for you. We'll do this incrementally and slowly. This is not a race. Parents are like trying to do so much so quickly now that we have all this knowledge. In the last, I would say, since 2017, this idea is starting to really catch on. You start seeing gluten-free and anti-inflammatory in the magazines, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's about the last 5 years. This is really catching on. Thank goodness. There's a turn. I really believe we're rounding the corner, and we're reclaiming our healthcare infrastructure to actually help us be better and not sick care, right? Emergency medicine is brilliant. I'm so grateful for it, but we need to reimagine our our chronic disease and our longevity care. We need to support the parents. Thanks for hearing that. And it's through that you'll become the most radiant version of yourself that you never even knew possible. Remember, I said earlier, I was the least likely person to ever pull anything like this off. I was disorganized. I was impulsive. I rode the emotional roller coaster. I would be really high and then really, really depressed. My dad would say, you take all the oxygen out of the room. I was just, I struggled. But through hearing Zachary and living those principles for myself and for all of us, my mind started becoming more clear. My body started functioning more optimally, which gave me more energy and zest. And I started connecting to this joy that is not dependent on your circumstances, your current circumstances, and inviting spirit and more and more. I mean, here the spirit came to me in my most darkest of hours. I was having a nervous breakdown on my land. I was kicking and screaming, literally on my belly. My children were asleep. Zachary would take naps, so he and Jack slept nap time together. So that was about 2 hours for a while, time I had by myself. Then I would landscape out in the woods and cut down invasive species and really open up the woods, and the wind currents would come in through the woods, and I would just invite spirit into our space. And one day, though, I was literally having a nervous breakdown, and I heard Kara, and I sat up and I looked around because we're on 15 acres. No one came around. Remember, there were days. I mean, there were weeks I went without seeing people. You wanted a child, Kara, but you don't like what you got?
Oh.
And I said, I don't know what to do with this. This is killing me. I felt like the man had me around the throat, and the grip was ever increasing, and I was being aggressively strangled. And the parents need to get to this place where we receive divine guidance, because there is a way. It's actually not really all that hard, and it's actually really not all that expensive. It just asks you to courageously stand up and be willing to look back on your timeline of all of your influencing factors that have accumulated over time, that have set you up to be experiencing this right now, to have brought a child into the world that is hurting so much because of all of what has led up to this moment.
My own belief system, and what a lot of people tend to believe, is that our children choose us.
Yeah.
We chose our parents.
To me.
Yeah, and I think in these times of everything is about comparison and social media, and am I doing it right? Am I seen enough?
Am I
A
doing
huge,
enough? Right.
right, a huge part of everything that you're saying feels like it's what you're saying is take a step back and say, how can I be the best person for myself, but
Right
also
now,
for
right
my
in this
child?
moment. What's
Yes.
one thing right now I can do to take care of myself, so then I will be in a better state to be more present for my child and my family? What's one thing I can do? How can I make this just a little bit better? And if you start asking that question, then you'll find the answer. And if you start asking better questions, then naturally you will look for that answer. And that's how you start putting one foot in front of the next to affect your circumstances, rather than your circumstances dictating your reality.
That is so, so beautifully said. So beautifully said, and so important, because people lose their sense of self or their trust in themselves. I think you were divinely guided through all of this, and they just kept like putting out those little stepping stones.
100%.
Step here, step here, step here.
Yes.
And now your son and your other son and your family, and you're working with this community of healers. So where can people find more information about this? Because it's so fascinating.
Yeah,
And
get to the root with a two,
yes,
numerical 2, gettotheroot.com. Hope for Healing and their leadership team and everyone that's, like you said, the community of healers, we've been working together for the last year. And they have been in practice for 7 years. As I said, they're a visionary pediatric practice for well child and chronic disease, specifically autism and PANS and PANDAS and SIRS. Yeah, we're ready for you. We've been working the last year to combine our knowledge. I opened my practice 10 years ago. They opened 7 years ago, and together, individually, we've been learning. And now collectively over the last year, we've been joining all of our symbiotic skill sets to offer the premier model in this country to take more families through this journey and to spend their money and time wisely. And I go back to that because everything's so expensive, right? That's just the global economy right now. Functional medicine, personalized medicine, it's out of pocket because insurance won't pay for it, which makes you wonder, well, what's insurance paying for? But that's a whole other conversation for another time. So it is out of pocket and it's expensive because we're not subsidized by insurance. And our collective promise to you is that we're going to take you to do this right. And actually the least expensive things are up front. So let's save your money. Let's do this right.
Are there resources on gettotheroot.com that would?
We're in a major, yes, of course there are. We're in a major restructuring right now, and a lot of content is being built. We're organizing it so it's in small snippets. All this is a big project. Just learning about functional medicine and learning about personalized medicine and sources of inflammation and really paying attention to your thoughts and your beliefs. You got to start there. You got to start with what do I believe? I believe that my son was covered by autism. I didn't believe he had autism. I didn't believe autism was something he was. I believed it was a set of symptoms that they put a diagnosis on. So there's an algorithm for this out-of-date care to be recommended. So I believe that I was uncovering this being, and my beliefs, my thoughts then led my words to speak those healing over my family, to speak with the people I was interacting with for his care, for the people in the communities. I was trying to explain why we're doing what we're doing.
I've been sitting here taking notes and just my mind is spinning, thinking about the impact this will have on so many people, but also on a personal level. I'm a huge fan of helping people get into the driver's seat and take the direction of their own lives. From what you're sharing through functional medicine, through all of these steps that you can start today, these little baby steps, you're empowering the families to have a higher level of true health and wellness and to I really believe leads to a higher quality of life in all aspects, which is absolutely brilliant. It's so brilliant.
Empowering families. That's right. This is a family care plan. We do this together, and functional medicine is a path of transformation. So it doesn't happen quickly. So coming to functional medicine, please understand and take a couple deep breaths. And I know you feel like you're in the race against time. So did I, but I was forced to go slow because we didn't know what to do. And so now we have to pace yourselves because you will cause more harm through all this because it's a journey.
And it's great because everything you're talking about brings more ease into every aspect of your life for everybody. There's nothing in this that feels negative. Oh, we're going to get the toxins out of the body. Oh, we're going to have less stress and inflammation. Oh, I mean, these are all how we want to be here, which I think for a lot of people listening that are highly sensitive, empathic, intuitive, personal opinion again, I think a lot of children who may be covered with autism, I love that, by the way, are highly sensitive people, incredibly highly sensitive.
And really
And
connected.
Yes.
Actually, they're really amazing. And that's why people who have autism are really proud of it. There are some people who aren't in pain. They're accessing all of the best that this kind of change in our genetic code is creating. And that's beautiful. I'm not saying that every person with this diagnosis is in pain. That's not, I hope that is clear. But yeah, let's uncover them. Let's bring ease. How can I bring ease into this moment? How can I create a state of healing, of relaxation? How can I promote our parasympathetic drive? And so that's gentle music, that's removing clutter, that's cleaning out pantries, cleaning out junk, right? Just that are trapping our energy's not moving in our home, it's not moving in our bodies. I was able to create this sense of peace and order and a routine as I learned how to work with Zachary. And so we influenced.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So again, thank you so very much for coming
Thank
on
you,
today. This
Denise.
has been amazing and enlightening and just brings such a sense of hope.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. And so again, this is Kara, and you can connect with her at gettotheroot.com. Thank you so very much. And for
Thank
those of
you,
you who are
Denise.
listening, see, this is another exceptional example of spirit will light your way. Follow
Mm.
your heart, and you are going to make a difference. And I promise you, I'm not being altruistic when I say that. I really do believe we're all being called up to help. So thank you again.
And help one another, right?
That's right. Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.